Hi guys, it's Kelly here, and I am absolutely delighted to be participating in Fusion's Card Challenge second year celebration. I was invited by my friend Michelle, and today I concentrated on the photograph, not the sketch. I'm going to be using some Winnie and Walter products, which is the Big, Bold, and the Happy, Elsa's Flora, and Addie's Garden. And then I'm using Simon Says Stamps, the Chevron pattern stencil. So here I'm just putting down clean clear water on some watercolor paper. I am working on Canson Montalbal 140-pound watercolor cardstock. I have it taped down. So I smushed some mustard seed onto my background, or I'm sorry, onto my Ranger Craft mat, and then I'm adding that with some clean clear water onto my background. And this was a trick that I learned in one of the online card classes. Well, I do think that washes of color in the background are super pretty. I love this technique. You can do this using your stencils, whatever stencils you have. I put adhesive, a temporary adhesive, on the back of my stencil so they don't move. You don't have to do that. And then I'm going to weigh it down with a block and smush it down so the water is flat against the card. Then from there, I'm going to set it aside. I'll probably put it underneath a couple of books just to make sure that it's all good and smushed down. And I'm going to let it dry like that. While that's drying, I'm going to go ahead and stamp out all of the rest of the images I'm going to use, bunches of leaves and some beautiful flowers from both of those Winnie and Walter sets. And then after this last one, I just ran out of room on that one piece of cardstock, so I'll be stamping my bigger flower on a separate sheet. And then I just did some Copic, I mean, I don't want to call it quick, because it was quicker than normal, but still detailed. So somebody had asked me if I would leave my marker colors up a little bit longer. You guys apparently were only seeing them for like 1 second. For the older videos where I have not left them up there long enough, please just pause it so you can get the color combination if you're looking for it. Here, I colored all of my leaves with the same color combination. I didn't color them all the same way. Sometimes I did the shading from the top, sometimes from the bottom, sometimes from the bottom of the top, just to get a little bit of variation. And doing this first leaf, I realized very quickly that my markers had not been re-inked in quite some time. So I did re-ink them before moving on to the flowers, which you're going to find out is also a disaster for me. So for this first rose, I just colored it, the whole thing with the lightest color. And then I'm just doing small lines where the shading would be the darkest. In super detailed flowers like this, I don't like to get real heavy with my shading, my first layer. I just do small lines where it would be, and I do that from my lightest out to my darkest. And this is just because when you lay down a Copic, because it is alcohol, it spreads. And when you have such a small area, you don't want it to spread too far. You don't want to completely take out your highlight. So just try to be really light-handed with it for your first go-round, see where it sits, and then you'll know where you need to add some more. I didn't show the second flower, but I colored it the same way. So now that I'm basically done with the first layer, then when I go back in with my second, which will be moving from my darkest out to my lightest, I will add in a bit more shading into the petals, because that way I just know how far that dark is going to bleed out. That sounds like terrible terminology, but that's the best way. It bleeds into the paper. So here, this is my second to darkest color, and I'm just adding that in. Then I'll go in with the third dark, or second lightest, or third darkest, however you want to look at it. And here, I'm not taking it all the way out to the edge. In the center, I'm coloring it entirely in the center just because that would be the darkest. And then for my lightest color, I'm just hitting up those little edges one more time. And like I said, I did both flowers the exact same way. It's a pretty Copic heavy video, just because there were so many flower images that I used. Here, you're going to find out how refilling those markers came back to bite me. I wanted this to be, my intention was for this to be my lightest color yellow flower. That's not ended up what happening. That's not ended up what, it didn't happen that way, yo. So here I am starting with my lightest color in this one is is a 0. And then my second darkest is Y00. And then from there, Y11. And again, I'm doing the same thing. I'm using the flicking technique. I'm using a very light hand to just add in shading where the darkest part of my shading is going to be. And when I get to the YO2, which I intended to be my darkest color, there it is. Disaster transport. So immediately I'm like, tried to blot it up. I hit it with my 0 marker, trying to lighten it up. And after all was said and done, it still looked like this. So I just figured, this is going to be my darkest yellow now. We're working. I had intended on having 2 different yellows. This one, I couldn't get the color up as much as I wanted. So I just embraced it. So now I'm going in with some darker yellows, and I'm doing the same thing that I did before. Nothing's changed about our technique. It's always the same. For me, especially when I'm coloring flowers, use a light hand, just using the tip of the marker, going with the shape of the petal. You don't want to, quote unquote, go against the grain. It will make your flower look unnatural. So I try to see the shape of the petal before I start laying my color down. And I am a paper turner. That's just more comfortable for me to flick away from myself. And it's also far more comfortable for me to get the shape and the direction that I want them to go. I'm going to go back in and add a little bit more of that dark, just because I felt like it kind of got washed out. Yellows are hard for me. I don't really have a good yellow combination that I like for my darkest color. So now this one is going to be my lightest yellow. I'm laying down the 0 just to get my paper saturated so I have good blending. And these ones where they lay on top of each other are always interesting. Just make sure you keep your highlights on the tips. It's what separates each level of the flower as the petals lay on top of each other, and it helps them to look a little bit more realistic. So here my darkest color is going to actually be a W. And the reason is, like I just said, all my yellows are really bright. I don't have a yellow that I'm super comfortable with as far as getting some darker shading. So I just used a warm gray. And like I said, you'll see that when we get there. So in the interim, I'm just hitting the little areas, and obviously the ones that are smallest, that are the furthest underneath, are going to be the darkest. Those you're probably not going to have white highlight on, but you should still see a delineation between your darkest shading and your lightest. So even if you're taking the Y11 all the way out to the tips, you should still be able to see where the W and the YO2 come in, because they do lay on top of each other, but that doesn't mean that there's no lights on any of the tips. There's not going to be as much light as what's on top, but there is still going to be some light that hits it. Now, when I color my flowers, very rarely do I use a light source, because normally I'm coloring the blooms just by themselves. So here we are with the W3. I could have used a C3, but with the cool grays, sometimes I feel like when you put that on top of a yellow, it gets like a little bit of a green tinge to it. I don't know if it's because the C's have a bluer base, but I opted for the W. I felt like that was going to be better. And when I first put it down, it looks a little brown, but once you go back over it with that yellow, you don't even see it. It just looks like some regular shading, like some natural shading. So after that is all done, I will go back over it with my darkest yellow color. We're not foregoing the same, what's the word that I want? The same order of markers that we have been doing. We're still doing those all together. We just added in that W3. And to me, when I look at it, I can totally see now the separation between each one of those levels of petals, where before I was having a bit of a hard time because the flower was so bright overall. And then I tend to move pretty quick once I'm going back through the second time. And I did bring out my Y11 a little farther out than I had wanted to originally. So that meant my Y00 also came out too far. And I'm just going to fix this with my 0 marker. I'm going to take it from the tip of the petal and push that color back in towards the center. And you can do this with any color. The Ys, I mean, it's pretty easy because they're such a light pigment anyway. But it'll work with any color. That's why they call it a colorless blender. It will help you move and mix so that you can get what you want. And then, the flower looks a little brighter. And for this last one, I'm going to use a lot of the same pinks that I did for those roses. I just switched up the intensity of the color. So Y02 was my lightest color for this one. It was my middle color for the rose bloom. So it's just stretching, your markers a little bit more and using different color combinations to get just a slightly different look. This bloom will be much darker than my rose, but they'll still be complementary because they came from the same colors with just one or two little tweaks. That's the word I want. Tweaks is fine. So one of the things that I do, I like bringing in this RB55. It's because it's a little bit of a purple base, a little bit more violet than pink. And when you put the lighter colors over it, it doesn't, I guess, pull up as much color. A lot of times when I use the RB04, which is what I used for the smaller rose bloom, when I put the RB02 over it, it really, really picks up the color. And then it's almost like I didn't even have a mid-tone. With this RB55, it stays put pretty well, even when you go over it with the lighter tones. So I really do like that color. The RVs are hard. I was talking on the phone to one of my girlfriends, and we were just, in general, having conversation about Copic markers, and both of us agreed sometimes the RVs can be a bit tricky to deal with. Some are more pink, some are more violet. You don't really know what's going to go together until you get them down on the paper, and then, like I just said, you put the lighter ones over it, and sometimes it's a hot mess. But again, because this flower is so layered, I'm treating it the same way that I did that second flower. I'm just using little lines of the darkest color because I don't want it to turn into just a dark, mushy blob on me. And then in the areas where it meets, where one petal is turned up and one petal is turned down, I don't shade both sides. I pick one or the other where I feel like it's going to be darker, just because in the past I have done the top and the bottom, and then that area just felt like, boom, dark. So I just have gotten to the habit of picking one side or the other, and that seems to work for me. If you like the super dark look, then that's fine too. Whatever your preference is. You've heard me say that before in your videos. There's no right or wrong way to do this. It's just whatever is pretty to you. And that's what's pretty to me, so that's what I do. Here, we're just going back over. I'm in some of the larger petals. I am shading out a bit more with this RV09 just to fill in that petal a little bit. I've seen a lot of artists where they do their shading, but the majority of their images stays really, really light, which is super pretty. That's not my style, I guess. I feel like I want there to be as much color as possible on my images. If you followed me, my blog or my YouTube, then you know that that's true. I'm all about the bold, bright, vivid color, as much of it as I can get. So again, I'm, taking this out, but not all the way to the tips. I want to reserve that highlight, and then I'll just go in with my lightest color and hit all those highlighted areas, which now look completely white, even though we both know that's not how they started because you watched me color at the beginning. So from here, this will be the last flower that we're doing. These are all the images that we've colored, just so you can have a peep-see about what we're looking at. And then I prefer, when I fussy cut my images, I cut them down into separate pieces just to make them smaller to color. And I outline all of my images. This is a EK Success journaling pen. I pick the thickness of whatever matches which stamp I'm using, and I outline all of my images that way. Here, the one on the bottom is outlined, the one on the top is not, and I wanted you to see the difference, why I take the time to do it, because to me, the one on the bottom, the colors just look so much more intense. So now we're back to this. I'm not going to lie, it was a few days between videotaping, so that was drying a really long time. It doesn't need to dry that long. And because I use that repositionable adhesive, sometimes I get a little stickies. I just pick that up with an eraser. It's totally fine. I cut down my piece to be the background for my card. And now I'm going to start arranging my flowers. It takes me a long time to arrange flowers, so I usually do them off camera. And then I will take a picture of it, and I can refer to that on my phone. Another trick that I like to use is I use little dots of repositionable adhesive on the back of my pieces. I wait for them to dry so that I can move them around, and then I start sticking them down, because nothing is worse when you're trying to build a bouquet of flowers and they just keep sliding all over the place on you. It makes me want to tear my hair out. So in order to avoid that, I use a little bit of repositionable adhesive, and it saves me a whole lot of frustration. So once I have rebuilt that, to match the picture that is on my phone, and I'm happy with where all my pieces parts are, then I'll go ahead and start peeling up the flowers, the leaves as I go, and really sticking them down. And here you don't even have to take the whole thing apart necessarily. You can just move in sections, so you don't have to start from scratch rebuilding. And it's especially if you don't want to have to, or if you're trying to get it in a certain spot on your card. So once that is all done, I'm going to move on to the sentiment. I toyed around with using the big love. It just didn't work out. So I'm going to use my embossing buddy bag on some black cardstock, and I'm going to ink up the tiny with love with some Versamark ink, stamp that down. I mounted them so far apart on my clear block because I knew I wanted to trim them down to look like labels. I'm going to put some white embossing powder on that and then heat that up with my heat tool, and I'll go ahead and trim them down to be little squares. And this is going to go to my friend who I have been thinking of quite a bit lately. I'm sure most of you in the crafting community know recently we had a loss. Leslie Hannah had passed away during Christmas time, and that was very sad. And my friend was very close with her. I was not as close with Leslie, though she was a wonderful woman. But she's just been on my mind, and I wanted to send her a little something to let her know that I loved her and I'm thinking of her. So nonetheless, this is, I'm going to add some Wink of Stella, because even in sad times we need shimmer. And that's going to basically be the card. So if you've never played with the Fusion Challenge before, you pick the sketch or the photo or both, and then you make a card. And I know there's going to be lots of wonderful things going on the blog. I will link to that if you're on my blog. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'll link in my description. I hope that you will head over and play along with them. There's some wonderful, talented women. And thank you to Michelle for inviting me. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I will see you later. Bye.